Aziz has covered ground, and the ambassador covered ground. So I don't think we're going to do deeper analysis. We want to open it to for questions, views from the audience. What we have, my presentation is available, so we're going to put it on our webpage. And Baso is here. If you leave your business card, we can send you both the occasional paper, which is the basis for these discussions, as well as the presentation. I'm going to say a few things for less than 10 minutes and invite Professor Garth Shelton to come, and he'll be followed by Dr. Bob Wekesa. They're both from Wits University. And then we open, and each one of us will have less than 10 minutes. And most of the discussions will proceed from there, and we can conclude any missing issues. There are a number of key issues. The presentation in itself, as you can see right on the board, it's quite lengthy, but I'm not going to cover other than say few things. When we look at South Africa, China, we always forget that in the Second World War, we were both on the wrong sides. We were with the Allies, and the Chinese were with the other side. So we did go to war. It's something that we don't talk about. So it is important, but let me qualify it. While the apartheid South Africa was on that plane, the ANC and other liberation were with mainland China in terms of support and solidarity. It's quite important, since we're at university, to put things into perspective so that when we look back at our history, we don't miss some of these issues. I'm not going to talk about most of these issues have been covered. I'm just going to talk more about the lessons learned towards the end of my presentation. The very first issue that we talk about, especially for South Africa, there's this view since 1994, I think it emanated in the both colonial and apartheid, that due to South Africa's relative development, the notion of South Africa as a gateway has been so strong, particularly in business sector. The business community talk about South Africa as a gateway. So I think one of the major lessons that we need to have with our relationship with China, South Africa is not going to be the only gateway. There are so many gateways into the African continent. So we have to be very clear on that. There is a need for extensive research. China is doing extremely well in terms of inviting South African students. I think the number is increasing on a yearly basis into China, and there's a lot of learning that is taking place, including some of our own students who are in mainland China learning. I think more needs to be done so that we have a two-way traffic, more Chinese coming on the African continent, as well as South Africans and Africans in China. Some of the key areas as far as the higher education is concerned is China has made inroads when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. It's leading with new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, something that is so close to this university and most people that all what we know in next 20, 30 years, more than a quarter of the jobs that we know won't be there. There won't be need for them. So what lessons are we learning? Are we talking about catching up as the African continent? We're busy talking about the third industrial revolution itself, manufacturing, the industrialization, infrastructure. All these are key areas. But let us not lose sight of looking into the future so that the African continent does not lag behind key developmental issues that developed countries, particularly China. Why are we strong on this particular issue? Because if you look back in 1955 at Bandung conference in Indonesia, these were the issues that we discussed. China was a poor country at that time. But I think what was key was that developing countries, the bulk of those countries are here on the African continent, have to catch up and they have to break the relationship in which developed countries are the ones that bring technology. They don't share, there's no technology transfer. And our relationship with China need to break away from that kind of thinking where we only are the buyers and consumers of technology. I'm amazed with the technology and how Africa has advanced in that. But at this stage, we're much more consumers. We have ever expanding consumption of the new technologies, and we buy, which means we don't create jobs. We don't have the knowledge and the know-how. And when we talk about the new technologies, it also comes with certain cultural impact. I always laugh with my own 24-year-old son that with Facebook, if you enter, most Africans, you enter your name or your face there, it says 70% of you is German or it's American. It is not by mistake, because when the artificial intelligence is designed with a Western cultural imperialism inserted in it. Therefore, you are not existing in that new. And therefore, we have Ubuntu, for instance. We also have Confucianism. China is building its own cultural issues within the new technologies. And we, as Africans, have to learn to what extent that we take our culture quite seriously. We collaborate with Chinese on equal basis and ensure that we are not left behind. We learn from them as much as they learn from us as well. There are a number of areas and key areas that South Africa, China, the relationship is growing, and as you can see, in terms of statistics, the ambassador spoke to a number of figures in terms of One Belt, One Road. The Johannesburg Summit of FACOC in 2015 spoke about 60 billion. Already, China has met the 60 billion and has achieved. We're looking forward to this year Beijing Summit to see what are the new offerings coming from China. But what is frustrating on this relationship, in all seminars, conference, interviews that I have done, is the frustration on part of the Africa side that we cannot blame China for our lack of being organized. We have to understand exactly what we want from China and put our case quite clear instead of following a Western narrative which says nothing other than China is here to take jobs, you're going to have debt. It's very patronizing. This does not mean that there are no challenges between Africa and China. There are challenges. Any interaction of two people and more, you're going to have challenges. However, this relationship is well structured that the AU, Africa, and China, through the forum, is able to discuss, have the discussions, and deal with quite a number of issues. Let me name some of the challenges. As we were in Bandung 1955, I wasn't born then, there were a number of issues that were discussed. I think at the center of Bandung solidarity was the issue of racism. We Africans were fighting colonialism and assisted by China and others. That does not mean among ourselves we won't have problems. You hear a number of stories in China as well as on the African continent. Quite sensitive issues that have race issues. Let us not assume that we're so close and the solidarity volumes in terms of trade that therefore the race issue won't be an issue to be constantly dealt with both in China as well as on the African continent. We have to be conscious to these issues. The issue of poaching and the rhino, the perception is that, and at times it's backed by statistics. They are people who are arrested, some from China. Ambassador has spoken on it in a number of forums, how hard he has become in terms of dealing with rhino poaching. We are pleased that the Chinese government has put in place tough measures of dealing, firstly by banning the usage of ivory, as well as the campaign within China of educating people in terms of saving not just the environment, but rhino as well as elephants and all important conservation things that we're dealing with on the African continent. The trade and the nature of this trade. We consume more finished products from China. The bigger question we have that we pose to our government, as well as all governments on the African continent, for how long are we going to ship raw material? We have to deal seriously. And as far as South Africa is concerned, there's the NDP. Key to NDP is the issue of beneficiation. We would like to see more of Chinese investment on One Belt, One Road. Far beyond that, Chinese investors to work closely with African countries to ensure that we beneficiate our material and we add value, we create more jobs. I think that needs to be openly discussed among ourselves as we deal with the question of Africa-China relation. We have to deal with the issues that are emanating from this growing investment between China is around the issue of peace and security. I think in peace and security, it's one key area. China, something that I mentioned to Chinese scholars who were here, has recently done extremely well, not only to build the OAU headquarters, but I think we need to go beyond building of a headquarters of the AU. China is contributing quite immensely in Africa peacekeeping, but let's put things quite clear. China investment on the African is growing, and therefore, who's going to keep and defend Chinese investment on the African continent? China itself cannot rely on Western world to underwrite peace and security for its own investment. Therefore, I think it's quite important for us to say it is in Chinese interest to ensure that it increases its security to guard its own investment. It's a national security first and foremost. But far beyond that, within the historical relationship that we have, I think there's a golden opportunity to ensure that the AU works quite closely with China on areas of logistics, movement of people. Africans are capable of keeping their own peace, provided they have the logistics and the training that is conducive to silencing the guns, which is key and most important thing. You cannot have development alongside conflict. We have to stop. We also have to look at issues of gender through the on question of health. The Ebola has been raised, but in all these areas, it does not mean that Africa cannot deal with the health issues, education. It cannot deal with agriculture. I think what is lacking is the know-how, the capacity, and the training. More and more for our students who are going to China, we have to be very quite critical as Africans so that we go in different sectors of our economy to have our students be trained in those areas. And more of Chinese rail that is being built on the African continent. I don't know, some of you have been to Kenya. From Mombasa to Nairobi, there's a fantastic rail that has been built. I think we need to think far beyond that, just building rail. The bigger question is that next 10 years, 20, 30 years, 50 years, do we need Chinese to build our own rail? No. We have to have Africans building their own rail and African companies bidding for rail building in China. This is what we need to do. We have to think along those lines so that we are not just receivers of gifts, receivers of capital. We need to generate knowledge and able to service this rail and all other major infrastructure that China is leading on the African continent. I think, let me pause here. We have Professor Gert Shelton who will come and give his brief presentation, and followed by Dr. Wekesa. Then we open for discussion. The ambassador is still around, so he's going to come back in. I know some of you have questions. You will pose your questions, and we have a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm Gert Shelton from Wits University, teaching international relations, focusing on China, Japan, and Korea. And I'd just like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be here today. And number two, special thanks to Dr. Manyai for creating this platform on which we can talk about China. I've got three major themes I'd like to deal with. The first one is to argue that China is Africa's and South Africa's best possible development partner. I'll give you 6 reasons why I think China should be our development partner. Then I'll make 7 comments on Dave's paper with a view to the future, how we can strengthen the China-South Africa relationship. And then I'm going to give you 7 suggestions on how to measure the China-South Africa relationship. So it's 6, 7, 7, okay? That's how I work with my students, so they don't forget. And then I check in the exam if they get it right, whatever. The key in the exam is they should actually add to what I give them, update, and make it stronger than the facts I give them. Okay, so let's go. Let me give you 6 reasons why I think China is Africa's best development partner and South Africa's best possible development partner. The first thing is, if we look at all the roads and railway system that's been built in Africa by Chinese companies, which other external actor could possibly be doing that kind of construction in Africa? So that's my first reason. China is ready. China is doing it already. China is providing the construction we need on the continent. Second reason is China's track record in reducing poverty, which is the best achievement in human history. 800 million people removed from poverty in China over the last 30 or 40 years. It's exactly our challenge in Africa, to remove the same amount of people from poverty. I'm not saying we take the Chinese model and apply it exactly the same way to Africa. Obviously, we need some adaptation, some change for the African environment. But poverty reduction, China gets the gold medal, so obviously we should pay attention to that. Number 3, China is, I would argue, the best model for job creation. China creates 10 to 12 million new jobs every year. In 5 years, everyone in South Africa would have a job if we followed the Chinese model. That's the theory, right? We have 50 million, we can create 10 million jobs a year. So how does China do that? I think we need to study that very closely and see how we can apply that to Africa. Obviously, we can't bring exactly the same techniques, but definitely China can guide us in that context. Number 4, China is our best economic partner. And thanks to Ambassador Lin, I think he pointed out earlier, there are now approximately 400 million Chinese citizens who are classified as middle class. Middle class have big disposable incomes. They can buy anything that South Africa has to sell. On my most recent visit to China, I noticed they have shops just selling wine, nothing else. Wine shops in China. That's all they sell. And the shop's bigger than probably this entire room. Just wine, that's all. Nothing else. So that's a middle class thing, to find shops that just sell wine. But unfortunately, there was no South African wine for sale in the shop. So that's our opportunity, I would suggest. Middle class people buy everything from everywhere, and they tend to get richer and richer. So it's our fault if we don't take advantage of that. Number 5, I would suggest that China can help us enormously in food security and industrialization. Food production in China has increased dramatically over the last 40 years. I've been to numerous farms in China. I've seen with my own eyes how food production has increased. China has enough food to feed 25% of the world's population on about 8% of the world's arable land. And of course, industrialization. Which country industrialized the fastest in human history? Must be China. Okay, so there's lessons for us in that context. Number 6, my last point on why China is our best partner, and we should pay attention to them, is we need to modernize or reform the global political system. United Nations, IMF, World Bank, etc. This global system is now 70 years old, so it needs to retirement, I would argue. The retirement age is usually 60, as you would know. So it's 10 years beyond retirement, so we need to modernize the global system. And who's our best partner in doing that? Must surely be China, who would be interested in doing the same thing. So those are my 6 reasons why we have to pay attention to China, we have to engage China, and we have to invite China as our win-win partner, because I think there's so much we can do together. 7 comments on Dave's paper. I go to my second point. Dave mentioned South Africa is the gateway to Africa. I would agree, but I'd like to add something to that. I think South Africa should be the hub or the headquarters for engagement in Africa, not just a gateway. Gateway implies you kind of arrive at the airport and then you fly to another place. They let you through. I think we should stay here. I think we should get Chinese businessmen to set up their headquarters in South Africa. I'm thinking of Hong Kong as the model. You can go to Hong Kong and from Hong Kong, you can buy any product you want out of China. There are agents in Hong Kong who will access anything you want in China. You don't have to leave the Kowloon Hotel. You can stay there and get excellent food and everything will be brought to your room. So I'm thinking South Africa should be the hub, the center of engagement with Africa. We have the industry, we have the banks here, we have the financial system, as Ambassador mentioned. So South Africa needs to work harder to create something different, not just a gateway. Second point on Dave's paper, Dave, you mentioned we should talk more about economic growth in South Africa. How do we grow the economy? Absolutely, we have to do that. But my point is, we need to attract foreign direct investment, as ambassadors indicated. So our challenge is to create better conditions, I would argue, in South Africa, so we can attract more foreign direct investment. I think that's the way to grow our economy. That was the Chinese model. Mr. Deng Xiaoping said, let's attract investment to the special economic zones. It would be the foundation of growth in China, and that model worked very well in China. FDI is the first step towards creating jobs, etc. Point number 3, how should Africa engage China? If you raise that point, how should Africa engage China? I think that's a tricky one. I hear this at a lot of seminars. The problem is there are 54 African states. So you'll probably have 54, maybe even 60 strategies on how to engage China. Some governments will bring 2 strategies to the meeting, maybe. That happens. I would say what we should rather do is, when we go to the next FOCAC, Africa doesn't need one strategy to deal with China. I think we need 100 projects which we put on the table. 100 projects with feasibility studies. That's the way to engage China. And ask China in a very polite way, are you interested in any of these projects? I think that's how Africa should engage with China, through FOCAC. Not to try to have one strategy. I don't think we'll ever agree, but I think we should bring 100 projects to the table. And let's see. I mean, China may take them all. That'll be fantastic. I suspect China will take all and offer another 100. So that's the way to do it. Special economic zones, if your 4th kind of point you raised. Obviously, special economic zones have been very successful in China. I was in Pudong, Shanghai, special economic zone, in 1994, I think. There wasn't much there. But I've been to Pudong about 5 times since. Pudong Special Economic Zone now is, I think, the fastest growing region of the world, probably. One of the richest parts of this continent. Very, very successful. Thousands and thousands of foreign companies have invested in Pudong. And Pudong is a wonderful place to be in terms of economic growth, prosperity. So that's the model for South Africa. Again, we have to develop our own special economic zones. And in that context, we have to pay attention, I think, to the following. If you have a special economic zone, taxation rate should be very low. Labor should be available. You should have competitive wages. And you should have security for investors. Because those are all the things existed in Pudong back in 94, and they're even stronger today in the Pudong Special Economic Zone. So if we want special economic zones in South Africa, they have to be special. So taxation rate should be 0 or 10% for the first 5 years. You have to have competitive labor, security, etc. Otherwise, it's not a special economic zone. Then it's just an investment location. So we need to work hard, I think, to create those zones based on the Chinese model. Point number 5 in your paper there, Dave, you talked about untapped opportunities in South Africa. I think there are many. There are thousands. It's difficult to list them all. But probably we should build on those that already are started in South Africa. In this context, I would suggest green technology. There's already solar power projects in South Africa, as well as wind projects. Maybe they could be extended and added to. We know China is number 1 for solar panels. That could be the key. You know, if we put solar panels across the Sahara Desert, we can provide electricity to the European Union forever. They don't need any nuclear power stations. They can just pay us for that electricity, which we'll sell to the European Union. Okay, it'll be a very big solar panel system, but the sun shines every day in the Sahara Desert. We can generate energy for the whole of Europe with our sunshine. Okay, that's the idea. Number 6 is media cooperation, you mentioned. Of course, we have a lot of media cooperation. I think that's very good and very healthy. I would suggest that add to that is information exchange. A lot of my students don't know that much about China. And then they have to go to Google, or they have to go to somewhere else. And then they will get, obviously, a certain type of information, which is perhaps not accurate, perhaps not that useful. I try to share with them my view, my perspectives on China, I share my pictures with them. But of course, they don't always remember everything. So we need quality information about China, how China has achieved their economic success, how China is changing over time. And often a media story of just 700 words doesn't give you the full picture. So somehow we have to exchange more information with the citizens in South Africa. Number 7, Dave, you talked about Confucius Institutes in Africa. I think that's wonderful. That's how we share culture and exchange. And then you suggested we needed some African Studies Institutes in China. Couldn't agree more. But my worry there is that they'll just become general kind of study, some sort of general institute. So I would rather suggest we have a focused centers in China. We could focus on China-Africa Agricultural Center, China-Africa Industrial Development Center, China-Africa Peacekeeping Center, China-Africa Business Center, where we focus on specific themes, which we could then apply to the China-Africa relationship, rather than just a general academic kind of institution, which is important, but then the answers tend to be academic and not practical enough. And it's not easy then to promote the relationship. So we could focus on a specific centers dealing with specific topics of interest to both sides. That would be my suggestion in that context. It's just too many countries in Africa. We'll have 54 kind of perspectives. If we focus on themes, maybe that's better. Okay, so I've been working hard, studying your paper for the last 3 weeks. So let me conclude with 7 suggestions on how we measure the relationship. You know, scholars and academics, we have to measure things. You know, we measure everything. How far from the Earth to Mars, etc. So we can send rockets there. So as social scientists, we have to measure. So let me suggest 7 ways to measure the China-South Africa relationship. The first one is trade. Trade has grown enormously between both sides. Obviously, there's an imbalance of trade. That's inevitable. We have an imbalance in trade with Germany because we buy BMWs and Mercedes, and we have an imbalance in trade with Saudi Arabia because we buy gasoline, petrol, oil to run our Mercedes-Benz. And that's going to be around for a long time. So imbalance of trade is normal in the international system, but we have to pay attention to it. And it's our challenge to sell more to the middle class in China to create the balance. So we can measure the balance, but we have to work harder. Investment is a second way to measure. I've noted very carefully, Ambassador, that you're going to push it up to $50 billion. So I'm very encouraged by those comments. But before you do that, I think we have a lot of homework to do. We have to create the right conditions, and then we'll easily get the 50 billion. And we'll get another 50 billion from other places as well. We could make it 100 billion in 10 years if we had the right conditions. Okay, we have that, if we had those special economic zones conforming to the concept of special. Number 3, we have to create jobs in South Africa. We're going to have a job summit. Sure, we've been talking about jobs for years. We have to do something. And so in this context, could I please ask China to transfer skills to our workers? Skills transfer to South Africans. It's probably the best way, the quickest way to create jobs. Number 4 would be we can measure job creation quite easily. Poverty reduction would be my point number 4 on the list. We need to reduce poverty in South Africa. I notice in China they have a very detailed list of people who live in poverty. They have their names, their address, they know where they live. And they can specifically help people in China to address the poverty issue. And within the next 5 or 6 years, there'll be nobody living below the poverty line in China. What a wonderful achievement for humanity to reduce poverty completely in China. Let us work together with China to do the same. Do we have a list of everyone living in poverty in South Africa? We don't even know who they are, where they are, what are their problems. So how are we going to reduce this situation? How are we going to address the situation? Let's follow China's model in this context. Number 7, construction, infrastructure. Ambassador mentioned roads, railway lines, houses, industrial new buildings for industry, etc. We can measure very carefully and very accurately what's happening in this context. And we have to create the right conditions to attract people to build roads and railway lines in South Africa or to improve on them. We have a lot already. I think it's mostly improvement, extending roads, railway lines. Harbors can be improved, airports can be improved. So there's a lot of work that could be done in that context. Number 6 would be corporate social investment to uplift communities. Wherever there is an investment from outside South Africa, there will be an expectation that the local community will receive some benefits, schools, football fields, hospitals, etc. I noticed Ambassador pointed out earlier that a number of Chinese companies are doing that already, so I'm encouraged to do more, and that can only be good for our relationship. Last on my list would be tourism. I think tourism is the quickest way to create jobs. For every 10 tourists, you create something like 2 jobs immediately. As they arrive at the airport, 2 jobs are created. You have to carry their luggage. That's job number 1 already. So we have to attract tourists to South Africa. It's critical. And if you leave the city and you travel for 1 hour towards Mozambique, you'll find wonderful places to visit. There are thousands of visitors there. Some of them are hunting lions. We have to manage those groups. But a lot of them are just here for tourism. So tourism is a great opportunity. Of course, as you said, Ambassador, security, very important there. So those guys who hunt the lions, we can appoint them to provide security, maybe to Chinese tourists instead. So that would conclude my summary of why I think China and South Africa are win-win development partners. I think there's so much South Africa can learn, can gain from engagement with China. And I just extended what David said in his paper. I thought it was an excellent paper. I just want to extend a few thoughts in his paper. And then as scholars, we need to measure this relationship. And I think in terms of the measurements, Ambassador's answered most of the questions already in terms of measurement. I think we're absolutely on the right track. We just keep doing what we're doing, work harder to attract the investment. Thanks for your attention. Che.
Ambassador Lin, Minister Pahad, Director David Monyai, Professor Garth Shelton, and Co-Director, all protocols observed. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by actually pointing out and mentioning that when we talk of Africa, China, soft power, I'm actually one of the representatives of that notion of soft power, because my studies, both at master's and PhD level, were at what we call Chungwo Chuan Mei Dashue. Right in Beijing, that is to say Communication University of China. For those who can't figure out what Chungwo and Chuan Mei and Dashue mean. And in fact, I'm very glad that I was invited to this event, because while in Beijing as both a master's and PhD student, Ambassador Lin was one of the major African diplomats within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we used to hear about, along with Lu Shai and others. So I'm glad that I'm today sitting next to him, not as a student, but as a fellow presenter, obviously recognizing the fact that he's my senior. I would like to start by, first of all, pointing out that only this week, in fact on Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, now former, replaced by Mike Pompeo, left Egypt to head back to Washington as the Secretary of State, but only landed to learn that his job had been taken away. He had been fired. And I mention this because before arrival, he had actually framed his visit by saying, no, look, China is eating Africa's lunch. That is before he left. In fact, he was at George Mason University, if I'm not mistaken. So one wonders why former Secretary Tillerson will start by first of all saying, no, look, China is a neocolonial power in Africa. China is a neo-imperial imposter on the continent, just before he made his trip first to Ethiopia, then Djibouti, then Kenya, Chad, and Nigeria. One then quickly realizes that actually it is in the interest of US foreign policy to always start by being critical to China, even when there's nothing in the air. So it was a way in which Secretary Tillerson was actually saying, no, look, we are going to Africa, not so much for trade and economic interests and so forth, but first and foremost to compete with China, in which case then Africa is the battleground as far as American foreign policy is concerned. And of course, as you might have read in the papers, the Chinese officials and Chinese thinkers have responded in kind, saying what is the US doing after all in Africa. I say this because whatever we say and do, the realist perspective in foreign policy and international relations is that there will be a continuous battle of ideas between the US and China. And unfortunately, Africans will be the battleground. We need therefore to perhaps consider taking a position. Where do we fall in this geopolitical perspective? Having said this, my discussion is fairly different from Professor Gert Shelton, who is a senior colleague, I should say, at VET. His was very structured, mine are reflections. So if I don't seem to be listing 4 points and then 6, and then concluding. Right.
4, 6, 3.
Yeah. But then I would like to perhaps follow the following approach. That in the Africa-China scholarship, and realize I'm not saying China-Africa, I'm saying Africa-China. It's a very loaded way of putting it. There's what we call a discourse, the Africa-China discourse. The Africa-China discourse has 3 major perspectives, which we can call perceptions. Perceptions of both Africa and perceptions of China. The first perception is that of optimism, that China can only be good for Africa. The second perception is that of pessimism, that says, like Rex Tillerson, that China can never be good for Africa, that China can only be good for Africa. And there is a third strand, which we might refer to as pragmatism, which is that in some respect, China is good for Africa, in some respect, not quite. So I'm trying to problematize this so that we have a candid discussion. And I think one can actually similarly talk of Russia, good, bad, or pragmatic, Europe, US, and so forth. Particularly, personally, I fall in the optimist line of thought. Not because I earned my scholarship to China, and therefore I must give back by saying nice things about China. But like the previous speakers have said, we have actually watched over the last 10 years the meteoric rise in Africa in terms of even just respect in the global system. The kind of respect we now earn globally was not really available before China made it its kind of interest to elevate Africa in a sense under that global South solidarity perspective. However, having said that, we need also to just focus on the other strands as well so that we can be able to problematize them, so that we can have a candid discussion. Sometimes when we focus on optimism alone and miss out on the pessimistic and pragmatic approaches, it's as if we are sweeping things under the carpet. And when we do that, sometimes we then fail to move on to discuss some of these issues, some of which actually David alluded to earlier. For example, when we talk about the South Africa-China relationship as an example, one of the things that I've not heard today is we are saying, no, look, South Africa, China have been very good friends. But a very basic fact is the fact that we're celebrating South Africa-China relations 20 years. Now, when I lived in China, in Beijing, almost every month there was a celebration of 50 years of China, Kenya, China, Nigeria. You know, China, Egypt is even longer, 1946, I believe. China, Ghana, 1958. So really, in terms of official formal relations, even as we congratulate ourselves over the 20 years, we must appreciate the fact that South Africa-China relations on the continent are younger than many other African countries. In fact, more than 50% of the African countries. Even though the relationship has been going on in other forms and guises from, you know, for millennia, in fact, for hundreds of years. I think as scholars, we must recognize that. And therefore, the question then becomes, what can actually the South Africa-China relationship learn from South Africa-Ghana, South Africa-Egypt, South Africa-Kenya, South Africa-Nigeria, and so forth? I think it's a question that we cannot wish away. As I mentioned, I'm actually just giving a couple of reflections on David's paper. The next point that I wanted to look at is on the pecking order of relations between China and Africa, China and South Africa, China and other countries of the world. Where does South Africa really fall? Pecking order. If you say this is where South Africa lies. I would like to suggest that on some levels, the relations are very strong, but on other levels, they cannot be. And I'm very sure we'll have some vibrant discussion. One, because you look at the volume of trade. The volume of trade between China and South Africa, I mean China and the US, is so high and so major that diplomacy must naturally follow. If you look at the South Africa-China economic engagements, for example, trade, or even China-Africa generally, it's actually a drop in the sea. So therefore, diplomacy follows, and it might be at a lower level than how China engages, how Beijing engages with Washington. If we say economic prowess is an important consideration, then economics and diplomacy going together, what we call economic diplomacy, will suggest, in fact, we just start by looking at the Chinese diplomatic mission in Washington. It is far bigger than our own diplomatic mission here. And I'm not saying that to dump down on the relations, just to point out that indeed, in fact, if you look from the academic end of things, who are the people studying China more? It's Americans. Why? Because they see the relations, coming to a point of conflict over trade and over geopolitical positioning. Those of us who are in the Africa-China academic discourse, we realize that sometimes when we study Africa and China, it's as if we are studying China and the US in Africa. It's a competition between two big powers, with us essentially, apart from David Monyaya and a few other people commenting once in a while. It's essentially, I challenge you to go to the internet and look up literature from the various institutions. You'll see that quite well represented. And to go back a little bit to that whole question of South Africa, perhaps, and I'm aware that, I'm actually Kenyan, which is why you can now understand why I'm being a bit critical of South Africa, China. Yeah. Sometimes we have some scholar at Center for Chinese Studies at Stellenbosch University characterize this competition between African countries towards China as a beauty contest. So usually we want to say, no, look, David and others will come and say, no, look, wait a moment. You Ghanaians are not as important to China as we are. And then Nigerians, as you know, Nigerians are very vibrant people. They will come with a few choice phrases and metaphors to demonstrate that they are actually bigger. Egyptians will say, no, look, we were the very first to develop relations with China, and in fact, during the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese embassies in other parts of African countries were closed, but not in Cairo. And so I think we need to be careful when we undertake this competition between us as Africans towards the Chinese, which is why I'll be a little critical to Professor Gad Shelton's position that we cannot have an African strategy towards China, that we need individual country positions. No, look, African Union has only recently, in fact, the ambassador here was very instrumental in the development of an agreement between China and the AU, the African Union, the representative of the continent. In any case, how do people from outside of the continent look at us? They don't look at us first as Kenyans, as Ugandans, as Malawians. They first of all look at us as Africans. So it is how we are framed. We have no choice but therefore have at least a strategy that looks towards China in a holistic sense. That does not mean that we do not have individual country policies, foreign policies towards China or the US or anywhere else. We can have a comprehensive African position, but at the same time have a SADC position, an East African community perspective, an ECOWAS perspective, and all these strategies need not clash. They can work in concert, they can support each other. I think that will be my position, and I'm very keen to hear Professor Garth Shelton's perspective so that we have a debate, you know. We just don't seem to be agreeing on everything. Yeah. I think moving on, I would like also then to touch a bit about the Chinese communities in South Africa as framers of the relation. One of the things that I've not heard today, as we discuss the 20 years of the relations, is where do the Chinese communities lie? You know, South Africa is indeed endowed in the fact that it has one of the long-lasting Chinese community anywhere on the African continent. In fact, for some, there's what we call South Africa-born Chinese, which sounds like SABC, yeah, you know, the broadcaster. If you go to the old Chinatown, not too far from here, there are people who will tell you they've known nowhere else. They are Chinese, but they have always known South Africa as home. Some came as early as 17th century, you know, through, you know, the Dutch East India Company via Malaysia and so forth. Then we have the more recent, you know, migrations. I think we talk of the 3 waves of Chinese migrations here. However, it's as if these Chinese communities almost disappear entirely from the discussion when we're talking South Africa and China relations, as to why one wonders and one wants to actually not only problematize it, but actually research what are the connections, what role do they play in diplomacy, what do they play in relations between the two countries. There's very little literature on that, and I thought it would be an interesting area to work on. For those who are keen, now that we are in an academic institution, there are 2 colleagues. One is called Melanie Yap, and the other one escapes my memory a bit, but they did a book nearly 22 years back, which needs actually revising. You know, just stipulating and going through the chronology of the Chinese communities as have been here up to this point in time. And I think it was called Concessions, Confessions, and Color. You know, it is worth actually revisiting to see at this point in time how the communities have evolved, the communities that then came in the 90s, and so forth. And while at the same time, one wants to also look at African communities in China. If you go to cities such as Guangzhou, you go to Yiwu, in fact, even Beijing, there are, you know, second generation, third generation Africans. You know, Africans who went to China sometimes in the early 80s. They are the Africans who worked on the Tazara Railway in Tanzania and then went with their Chinese colleagues in places, in various cities that then need actually to be researched so that they can be understood better. So in a nutshell, talking communities, because these relations are not about, you know, just government to government. We are talking people to people. And that is where the rubber meets the, you know, the road, as it were. This is where focus should be, in my opinion, be concerned, because we are talking people, rather than just policies flying in the air. I think I will want to then move on, and excuse me if I seem to be a little chaotic in my presentation. It's just because I'm looking at my notes. I think there was talk in David's paper that one of the reasons why South Africa and China have very close relations is because of the presence of the South African Communist Party within the ANC tripartite alliance. Now, that's a very interesting indication, point to note, because when you look elsewhere on the African continent, you hardly see communist parties. There used to be communist parties in the 60s, 70s, then, after the Cold War, many of them just fizzled out. Unless you're talking the Chama cha Mapinduzi in Uganda, in Tanzania, the CCM, which was Nyerere's party, which has actually metamorphed almost, away from left towards the center. So I think it is an interesting thing to note for scholars. Is it because there's a strong presence of the South African Communist Party within the tripartite alliance that the relations are closer? I will propose not quite. In the recent past, we have seen a major rapprochement between the Communist Party of China and just about any party on the African continent. So in my opinion, ideology is no longer really the driver of party-to-party relations. It's as if China is saying, no, look, we do not necessarily want to export the red ideology, as it was called in the 60s and 70s. We are saying you can follow your own path, we follow our own path, but let's have a middle ground. So I think that party-to-party point of view is an interesting one, particularly for those of us who might be interested in international relations, in political science, and so forth. The next point that I wanted to point out from David's paper is the whole point of the Beijing consensus, which I think is a concept that was developed by one Joshua Ramo, suggesting that Beijing consensus is based on certain principles. For example, no strings attached to disbursement of funds by China towards Africa. One of the things we must be careful about Beijing consensus is that even Chinese scholars themselves have been critical of that whole thinking, that there is a contest between Beijing consensus, which is a Chinese way of thinking, and a Western consensus, which is Washington-based thinking. I think that there's been criticism even from scholars such as Li Anshan, for example, non-scholars like Hao Wenping of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences that have said, no, really, China is not looking to export a certain model of thinking to the rest of the world. Rather, we are looking for a system that works. We are being pragmatic. So I think one might want to revise that whole concept of a contest between Beijing consensus versus Washington consensus as a point of view. So I think moving on, and I think we are coming back to this whole point of South Africa as the guarantor of relations between Africa and China, and problematizing it again. Not long ago, during the most recent BRICS summit, in fact in China, was it in Hangzhou or something like that? No, in Xiamen in China. There was talk of the possibility of, in fact, Egypt being invited into the BRICS. I mean, there was that talk, and I'm sure I would like to hear if indeed there was that discussion or not, which will suggest that South Africa cannot sit comfortable and say, no, look, in the BRICS we are the main guys and that's it. It might be that other countries might actually be bidding for the same position. I think I would like then to conclude by just making a very quick observation on a matter that was raised in the paper, which is to do with cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy, people-to-people relations. I think it cannot be that we continue as South Africa and Africans indeed, just receiving Chinese largesse, just being on the receiving end, as David was saying. But rather, we should be able also to offer scholarships to the Chinese, because that's our way of developing relations. We should be able to invite Chinese delegations to come visit us and see where we live and stay and so forth, rather than just waiting to say, now, when is the next scholarship from China coming? Or when is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China offering a free return trip with side viewing opportunities in China? In fact, while on it, in some respects, South African universities are very high up there, even in comparison to, apart from, say, Peking University or Tsinghua University, universities such as UCT, WITS, this great university called UJ, actually can compete very effectively with some Chinese universities. Therefore, there is room for the South African government, or indeed the universities or other entities, putting together a fund to do our public diplomacy, to do our soft power towards China, rather than just being on the receiving end. Thank you for listening to me.
You see, the danger of being the chair as well as a presenter, and especially if it's your paper, when it gets into sensitive part of the paper, you just stand. You say, time. Anyway, Bob, thank you. These reflections, the paper, the occasion paper, the speeches, and quite a number of other deliberations and were going to be uploaded to our webpage. As I stated earlier on, if you leave your detail outside, we'll also be able to send to you. I want to open, but before I open, some of the issues at University of Johannesburg, Confucius Institute, we're already doing that. With quite a number of Chinese students that come here, and they meet their counterparts, University of Johannesburg students, and they interact. And a number of our students go to China. Last year we had about 2-3 delegation to our great partner, Nanjing Tech University in Nanjing, and we're expecting more of this year. And throughout this year, we're going to have series of events. We had Wushu competition in the beginning of the year. We had the Lantern Festival, which was very successful, and this is the third event. We're celebrating the 20th year. And our next event, we're bringing one of the best scholars from Peking University, Professor Wang Dong, to deal with issue. I think it's this next month, right? We're going to invite all of you. There's a huge debate that was started by Professor Allison. Those who know Allison, he dealt with the Cuban crisis and nearly took the world to war. But now he has written another very important book where he's arguing that in the last 500 years, whenever a hegemon is out there, there is another hegemon that can try to unseat it, and war, it's not you can't avoid it. And therefore, there's a huge war coming between the United States and China. And Professor Wang Dong disagrees with that. And we will have him, and as well as launching his book as well, and discuss with some of our best scholars here in a public dialogue as we do. So let me open for discussions. I think we have a lot of questions. Wish if we had the whole day, but it's a half a day seminar. Your views, it doesn't have to be just a question. Let's just open to everyone to say whatever you want to say. I've noted David here, not because we share the same name, and then Ambassador right there, and then 2 in the back. Let me start with David.
When one power rises, and of course finds another power in the game, some kind of tension or the other actually rises. They found that conclusively that out of the 16 cases that they were looking at, 12 of those ended in conflict. And so I want to actually come to this thing of the optimism about the rise of China and its relations with Africa and the South broadly. That, sure, we've got to be optimistic. The optimism could be informed by the fact that we have become fed up with the current status quo of a largely US-led kind of world order, the bullying, the wars, the conflicts, the unilateralism, the militarism, and all of that. We're tired of that kind of a thing. But I'm not too sure if we can be so optimistic about multilateral reform and that kind of thing, given the fact that China sometimes abstains on crucial decisions in the Security Council. I'm not so sure if we can say on multilateral reform we can rely on China as a partner optimistically, as Prof was saying, to be our partner to transform this world governance system, the United Nations system and all of that. Simply because I do think that it's a question of posterity whether China will remain progressive as it is. And I'm not too sure if official Chinese policy is not contested within China. about the ambitions of China itself. Because the official policy of China says, quite openly, that they pursue their foreign policy and international relations on the basis of peaceful development. Peaceful development. That's that same concept. But I'm not too sure whether the future holds that kind of a thing. That's all.
Thank you.
My intervention is a rather technical one and very quick. Prof. Shelton mentioned correctly the possibility of rolling out more projects on solar energy. And I agree, as a good starting point, it has been rolled out in many parts of the continent, including in the Northern Cape, as we know. But I think you probably know our South African Ministry of Science and Technology has been doing a lot of research in this regard. And given that fuel cell technology is the second generation of alternative energy, and it relies on platinum, and South Africa is one of the largest producers of platinum. You're looking around about 70% of the world's platinum is found here. I believe that project is certainly one we could look at more closely for South Africa to work with partners like China. Thank you.
Sitting here, it goes back to this whole nation. Is Africa a country or is Africa a continent, which is a combination of many countries? And I stand with Prof. Shelton on that one, in the sense that we cannot, it's quite impossible for me, from where I'm sitting, for Africa to have one mandate towards China, because as different countries, we're at different levels of development and our needs are not the same.
My name is Cradle. I'm a student here at UJ. So, like, I just wanted to say, like, if you look at the world population, it's increasingly growing globally. And if you look at China, China is growing at like 0.5%. That's like a large number if you calculate it. And you look at their interest or kindness towards Africa, and we have like large amounts of unused land or agricultural land. And if you look at their population, how they are growing with like India and whatnot, like, is Africa not going to end up being a scapegoat for residential purposes or even agricultural purposes? Because I do know that we produce things but we don't sell them. They might take them. Next thing you know, we also don't have food now. So is China's interest in Africa not going to end up indebting us? Because if you look at that, we want to work with China and these countries, but if you look at the fact that China and Russia, which are both communist or supposed to be, they went through like cultural periods, and Russia went through the Stalin 5-year plans. They closed themselves and they were able to like grow as a country, or, you know, we never had those things, but now we want to start all of the sudden just, you know, it's like you want to pass an exam without studying while they studied. Your excitement won't just be the same. So we might come out of this on the losing end than the winning end. Thank you.
Okay, afternoon. My name is Oliver. I'm a civil engineering student here at the University of Johannesburg. I'd like to thank you guys for this dialogue because it's unusual for someone like me to actually come here. One thing I want to know is that how do I apply to study overseas, like maybe in China and stuff, like if I want to further my studies? Because I feel like that would be better if I come back and apply that knowledge here with this future infrastructures, building bridges and everything like that. And one other thing, I mean, if we are going to have future relations with China, we're obviously going to work with other Chinese youth in the future. So how do we integrate that? How do I learn the culture of Chinese, and how do they learn their culture? Because I believe that if we both know our culture, if we both understand the perception of how we live and our lifestyle and how we want to achieve, if we have a common goal, we have to know each other. So how do we break that ground? And then, yeah.
I just wanted to double check with His Excellency Lin. What is China's fourth industrial revolution sustainable strategy in terms of their relation with South Africa specifically? And also, I think the question that I intended to ask, he covered it, but I just want to know, in terms of cultural and language integration. What is China's plan with South Africa? For example, in reality, Mandarin is being offered in UJ, but what are the Chinese nation's intention in terms of learning the official languages of South Africa? And is there an operational plan? Thank you.
China, as large as they are in population, they will reach a certain stage where they live above par of poverty. But us being 50, close to 60 million, we are a developing country, but we are far from reaching that state where South Africans are living far above impoverished conditions. So he said, we don't know where to find them, but if you look outside of Gauteng, those people are largely available everywhere. We see them every day. I mean, it's not far to look. I mean, we don't walk around with our eyes closed. But moving away from that, we're looking at how the Chinese and the South African relation has been integrated into development of sustainability and growth and investment. With that being at the core, last year, Development Bank just opened by the former President Jacob Zuma, which we have seen a number of projects being carried out, but not directly benefiting the communities in South Africa, particularly impoverished people within the surrounding communities that are supposed to be part and parcel of being integrated into sustainable development into our country. They're supposed to see their lives moving from impoverished condition to a far better living conditions. With that, there is also a number of things that are not being addressed in terms of ownership and the means of production. I mean, also, we said we are a country of consumerism. To move from consumerism, we need to look at what as we need and how our indigenous way of innovation as South Africans we need to move in. Looking at the minister said that, show me the money. As we don't have money to show, we have resources to show, by the way. So with those resources that we have, an abundance resources that we have in our country, we can have an integrated way of saying, with our resources, we need to have 50% of ownership that each and every foreign direct company that comes to extract or exploit those minerals, 50% must be able to benefit the largely majority, particularly youth, which is the instinctively 60% of unemployment, which is we're trying to address that number in our country. Thank you.
I think for me, obviously this year presents a lot of opportunities for South Africa to meet at the highest levels of government. I think for South Africa and China to be in constant interaction. I mean, obviously, we have the BRICS summit, and we're also moving towards FOCAC later in the year. And with a new administration in South Africa, I think it obviously provides ample opportunity to actually engage at the highest of levels. But I think more importantly, in terms of, this is 20 years now of the relationship, I would see that in future, what we start getting more, hopefully, is a building of knowledge of China from a South African and from an African perspective. So to understand China better, so that China is not this, often painted mysterious, country and civilization and so forth, but that we're building the skills and the research within South Africa to understand China on their own terms. And you obviously will get more of that, I think, developing with the education exchanges and so forth, and with centers such as the Confucius Institute. But I think my last point, what I also find interesting, is that often we talk about and you see this a lot in South African media, this idea that China is this huge, country, and South Africa is just the small country, and therefore, how can South Africa even get any benefits from the relationship? And you get this narrative, almost as though South Africa has no agency in the relationship with China. But then when you actually go down and you actually, do proper research, you see that, in this policy brief, at least in the occasional paper, and there's a very interesting stat on foreign direct investment, where you see that in 2010, Chinese FDI in South Africa totaled around 5.6 million US dollars, whereas South Africa's FDI in China was approximately 800 million. So South Africa is investing more in China than actually China. Of course, we are huge trade partners, but when it comes to FDI, I think even though the rates have vastly expanded, from the Chinese side, I think we need to do a lot more research, because often we look at it, we say China, Africa, China, South Africa. But we as South African scholars are not saying, what are we doing in China? And clearly from the stats, it's clear that South Africa is investing more in China than actually China is investing in South Africa. And I think that raises a whole range of interesting areas that we need to explore, for research. And it debunks this idea that South Africa is just this country that cannot gain any agency, and by extension that Africa is a continent that has no agency vis-a-vis China. I think there's clear examples where there is agency coming from within the continent, and I think we need to explore that and understand, more as we build from this 20 years moving forward.
The question, I think one of the questions were directly fired at me from Kenya was, can Africa have a unifying strategy towards China? Sure, I think I agree with you, Ken, that we can have some common points that we work together on, but I would still suggest that it's very complicated to get 54 countries to work together. And the reason I would say that is for FOCAC, the first FOCAC, I was actually at a meeting which was then South Africa's Foreign Ministry, and we tried to give input into the FOCAC agenda, and we tried to find other African countries who would agree with us on what should be included in the agenda. And to be honest, after 6 months, we still didn't have good answers from other African countries. There were so many different opinions that we just kind of gave up and just sent our ideas through to Beijing. And it looked like other African countries just sent their ideas through. So we couldn't get kind of traction and coherent agreement. Maybe we needed more time. But it looks like African governments have a lot of different opinions about how to engage China. And it's hard to get one kind of particular viewpoint. Another question that was, I think, fired directly at me was about poverty reduction in Africa, South Africa. I think what I was trying to convey is that China's done really well in poverty reduction, and China's proceeding within the next 5 or 6 years. There'll be nobody really classified as living in poverty in China. And I just thinking we could do something similar to what China's doing in South Africa. I mean, we do have poverty. It is a big challenge for us. And if we can learn more from China, how to address that issue, that's what I'm suggesting. I know China has a very specific policy, poverty reduction kind of training center where they share information. I've been there. They gave us a lot of information on how it's done in China. We can learn so much from China. I think that's all I was trying to convey in that point. And then may I say to Dave, thank you for getting the floor open. Lots of wonderful questions. A lot of food for thought. I've noted them all for future research and future study, and that's great. Thank you for inviting me to share in this engagement.
Thanks, Paul.
Right, I think just 2 points. The colleague who raised the whole question of the peaceful rise of China and what that means for Africa in terms of its relation to the West and so forth. I mean, as you know, the African saying goes that when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. And so there we are. I think, Africans have to be very pragmatic, in my opinion. There are certain things that we can derive from China and others we can derive from the West. Hopefully at some point in future, Africa will be actually the big power, if it's feasible. But for now, development, as the ambassador was saying, money, infrastructure, roads and so forth, it appears they will come more from China than the US. But when we come matters of democracy, human rights, and so forth, it looks like we'll want to look, across the Atlantic for that. And as to whether there is a controversy between those two, it remains a very gray area. That will be my point. So for me, that's why, in fact, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about China. China gives Africa some leverage to discuss with global powers, the Europeans, the Americans, and so forth. Were it not for China, we might not be even on the global stage with a voice at all, as it were. In fact, for me, one of the unfinished businesses between ourselves and the Chinese in the global stage is the promise that we've been talking about since 2000, that Africa should get a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. In fact, as we go to FOCAC in September, maybe this is something that we should remind our Chinese colleagues under the FOCAC framework, that we really cannot have just 5 powers without Africa having a seat there. And perhaps that's one of the things that we should look at. I think the second question was very briefly on our colleague who wondered whether Africa is a country or a continent. In my opinion, there's no binary here. We are splitting hairs. The thing is that Africa is both a country and a continent. And I think I can go on and on. You know, I mean, we have common heritage and you know, going back in historical times and so forth. We think the same on many things. But at the same time, we are South Africans, Ghanaians, and so forth. It's just the way you look at China, it has a number of provinces. When you're in Beijing, you find even the Mandarin spoken there might be slightly different from the one in Guangdong. There's Tibet to the west, there's Xinjiang, and so forth. So I don't think we should just, you know, say we are either Africans or not. You know, we are South Africans or Malawians and therefore never Africans and so forth. I think the world is a very complex place and we can be many things at the same time. I think you see the WITS and a few other universities in South Africa have actually done well and they should be congratulated for starting what Pilani was actually alluding to, that we need as Africans to understand not just the Chinese, but the Americans as well, the Europeans. We need to understand the world. And one way of doing this is to establish centers of study of what we call area studies, you know, study of other regions of the world. What are they doing? How are they going about their business and so forth? And this is not really unique to South African universities or whatever. If you go to China, Peking has centers for the study of the US. You know, as I mentioned, Li Anshan leads the study on you know, Africa. There's the African Institute there. The study of Russia and so forth. I think we are latecomers, in fact, in terms of undertaking studies of Australia, of Papua New Guinea, of US and so forth. In fact, at WITS, I think there is the Center for Study of India, which started nearly 2008. I am actually associated with you know, Africa-China Journalism Center at WITS. And so I think we shouldn't shy away from establishing centers so that we have a deep understanding of others just as they understand us. Thank you.
Can I ask the professors and all you professors a
No,
question?
I wanted to give you a proper to your concluding remarks.
Oh.
That's your time.
Okay.
Yes. Don't just ask the question, you're concluding as well. Go ahead.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, look.
We need that.
I mean, this discussion has really shown that up till now we've been concentrating on government-to-government relations in discussions. And even many of us, Pilani, I thought you would be more familiar with this, within FOCAC, BRICS, there's a lot of non-government-to-government possibilities. But let me tell you, the Chinese have been here with experts already, with 3 or 4 delegations, preparing for FOCAC next year. And you ask yourself, what is South Africa doing in preparing for FOCAC and BRICS? And I've been now to 3 discussions at government level on preparing, including with the new team in Durko. And I'm getting a sense, I might be wrong, and this is a new dawn, so we can say what we want without fear of career limiting.
You are free.
Yeah, but the challenge for us as South Africans, and here are sitting professors, here are sitting some of our top students, even when we set up these centers, as we've set up now in WITS, the India Center or the America Center, are we changing our curriculum sufficiently so that all our analysis is not based on Anglo-American analysis? And I really want to believe that our institutions have to 20 years in our democracy, 23, begin to pose the question. I think we must stop making slogans. Coloniality of the mind. And that is not wrong if you give it content. The question is, you will not change coloniality of mind just reading Fanon. You have to go to the roots of what is the basis on which we analyze in both South Africa, Africa, and the world. I mean, our analysis of Africa at our institution needs a lot. Well, on Africa, let me not generalize. But I think if we study it sufficiently, we will find we are not sufficiently doing our own analysis of alternative facts. And I really want to say, if we as Africa, as 54 countries, we cannot accept this notion. Well, American leaders, even under Obama, were talking of South Africa as a country. Now this new one won't even, his administration won't even know where the continent is. But I mean, so that is a reality we face. Now, I want to say to you scholars, and in fact the professors, we need to have a discussion more about how are we going to learn based on African analysis of many things. And I want to say we have got a great opportunity with BRICS, FOCAC. There are too many. There's IORA, there's TICAD. I think when we got independent, democracy, we must have signed bilateral agreement with every country in the world. I think so. If you ask us, who were there at that time now, we've been asking the then Foreign Affairs, give us a list of who we got agreements. So we can begin to understand what will we sign in. And I do hope that now we get to a stage that as students, as professors, we begin to look more concretely. What is FOCAC? There is a lot of benefits in FOCAC. If we understand what it's providing, what is BRICS providing, what is, I mean, as an alternative ambassador, what is TICAD? That's the Japanese program providing. And begin as Africans to choose what is to the best advantage of us, South Africa and the rest of Africa. I think we start in that direction. And we have, you see, earlier we were talking about the 19th Congress decision, and David, that your question is a good one. Are we going to see eye to eye in global governments? But it's linked to what we were saying earlier. If we study the 19th Congress document and the Special Congress, there is an alternative being put on the New World Order. They call it, what is it, Ambassador, I mentioned, they call it a inclusive global order. And it's better we understand what the inclusive global order means and how do we as Africans make sure that this global order doesn't keep us out of the global order. And I personally think we must understand more what is the inclusive global order. We must, I wouldn't recommend to South Africa to go for, don't ever tell them outside. We're going back for the Security Council seat, not even the permanent one. We're going back for the 2-year one. Now, in the time when the United Nations global governments, including the Security Council, has become immobilized, because with Haley there, the American ambassador, you can't have serious dialogue. And with this administration, you can't have serious dialogue in the Security Council. It's been incapacitated, the Security Council. Do we as South Africa want to go into an incapacitated Security Council? My view would be no. But if we transform the Security Council, there's two country thing, because any consensus where Africa wants 2 permanent seats with a veto. Let me tell you, our best friends in the Security Council are not going to support that. So why are we aiming for something which is not even in the offering? And let me tell you, we are going to be so divided on the African continent on that issue. When we're trying to pull ourselves together for more important things, we'll be fighting for a seat on which they haven't even given us 2 permanent seats. And we're going to be fighting. So the alliances are going to change in Africa once we come to the permanent seat. At my age now, and I won't be there to fight that, I would say avoid that sort of debate. You know, rather amongst Africa, let's get a consensus. Brother leader had an idea, he said, no big countries in South Africa must go for that seat. The small countries, he meant Libya probably, must go for that seat. Now, I'm just showing it in a silly way, that this debate is much more complex than sometimes we have actually. And I want to hope with the ambassador that, and with David and them at Confucius, that we move away to these very general discussions now and be more specific on the topics we have actually. And more focus on smaller, you break it up groups, come back, etc. Unfortunately, we have packed up a lot of things in one morning. And I don't know, maybe you guys are younger, you can maintain all this in your head. But to take this forward, we will be coming back to another discussion, and if we continue the same discussion, then we haven't moved from where we started in 1994. Because many of the questions that have been raised were raised in 1994. But we were new and we couldn't find the answers. But now, I mean, with the Chinese partnership, with the, with other partnerships, and let me end by saying, like the world, we have got a deficit in leadership on the African continent. And we can have the best ideas in the world without dealing with the lack of leadership on the continent. We are not going to go anywhere.
I can assure you, UJ is the best university.
Is the chairperson allowed commercialization?
In the country and on the continent is already grappling with this issue. Ambassador, we'd like to invite you to give your concluding remarks.
Thank you so much for all of you, dear. This is the first time for me to open myself to the scholar or the university, but I think I learned a lot from you. At least I have to say appreciate so much. At least we have so many scholars, professor, the director for the institute, and also the student here. We have been here for long. I learned a lot from this, the workshop here. I'm so happy. And I think it's very productive and very soulful for me. Also, I learned a lot from this workshop. Let me come to first, I appreciate the effort you offer such an opportunity for me to learn from each other. For me, I try my best to be good to anyone else. But sometimes exactly, we don't know exactly to mutual understanding is very important. And this is why I keep traveling around the country, traveling around the continent. I try my best. China is not perfect. Just now as I share with you that in the year 2000, in the year 2010, before 2010 is hard for you to see the private car, the street full of the bicycle. But now, no more bicycle. The shared bicycle, not the individual bicycle, but shared bicycle. The street is full of the private car. If the young man like you and the girl, of course the young man, if you cannot buy the brand new car, no girl will marry you. Because the car is too small in China. Because 1 square meters of the house in Beijing will cost you 100,000 Chinese yuan. But if you just do the civil servant like me, it's sometimes, because I'm lucky, I'm old. You have to fight very hard. That is the great achievement we have made. Let me come to this question to save the time. My dear professor, China and American will never fight in this ground. Never worry. American and China, these two countries, together with Russia, we cannot fight war against each other. When we fight against each other, the whole world will disappear among these three. So you are free to relax, or just relax yourself. If American and China launch war against each other, some of the Taiwanese, They dream the American will come here to protect them. They are staying in the island. They know nothing about the world. Now, these three countries, each of them launched the war against China. The whole world will disappear. You have to remember the capacity. Not an American will come to China. China also will come to American, don't worry. That is, we taught to them, they understand very well. We're very relaxed. We are live in peace. It's not the time for war. The time has gone. And also, you see, now the American policy, let me tell you, the Taiwanese, unfortunately, they do not understand the policy of American. I was the ambassador to Liberia because I was the first when we take over Taiwan authority there. They have been there to keep that so-called diplomacy there for years because their president, they have the total diplomacy, so they need money. But finally, Americans say, no, we need to bring the war to peace in Liberia. But they asked on China to send the peacekeeper to Liberia. But I said, we cannot. We have to not have the diplomatic relations. American friends say, no problem. I'll bring it to you. And it's American ambassador and commander of the UN peacekeeping missions to have the chapter, of course, the UN helicopter. He's the commander. Flew to Freetown, right? In the capital of Sierra Leone, to fly my ambassador there to Monrovia. And asked that the acting minister of the transitional government from home to the hotel to sign the agreement. And when they left the pen down, 30 minutes, this government will come to the end. Because the transitional period come to the midnight. So Americans say, hi guy, sign it. Sign for what? Sign for diplomatic relations between Liberia and the People's Republic of China. Taiwan is out. The Taiwan, American interest first. Where's my interest? If you're in my boat, you're my friend. If you're out of my boat against my interest, you're my enemy. American no friend, they have enemy or no enemy. Very simple, not complicated. But I can trust you. China will never have the war in this continent. You'll never worry about. China, we do not, the peaceful investment, development policy. Not only from today, not only the slogan, my dear, that is our culture, based on our culture. We never, you see, we use the chopstick to eat our food. You understand? Chopstick. Chopstick coordinate. Well, you have to learn how to use the chopstick to coordinate in harmony for peace. American, of course, they get ready for knife and fork. Get ready to fight. We do not have. It's hard for the Chinese to use that force and knife. We teach our children for coordination to master the chopstick. You understand? Culture, that is our culture, you understand? It's different. When you go, the Chinese go to the restaurant, they will serve the beef. They will ask you, well done or medium? The Chinese always answer, well done, because they worry about the blood. The American people, they say, medium or 30%. They like it. The people are different, don't worry. That is our culture. What is it? It's easier, understand? The second is our record, the history. We have 5,000 years in civilization. 600 years ago, we have the fleet, very famous fleet to stop in what I call the sail from the Indian Ocean to your island. Stop in Mombasa, even in some area in this. Some people say, no, they sail fly over what I call the Good Hope until there's a small island country when we're there. They say, yours, the people 600 years ago have reached our island, what we call the Santo Tome Principe. The Prime Minister insists the Chinese sailor had reached their country. They said they have the record there. We have been here 600 years ago. I left how many Americans, how old they are? 300. When we sail to this continent, they do not have the country, my dear. They are the European Union. So, if we have the same history, this continent is China. It's South Africa, my dear. Because they just put their flag and send the army here. That is their country. We come here to exchange the mutual understanding and sell the silk, the Chinese tea, and bring something back home. That is trade equally. We come here to see the partnership instead of ownership. We stay equal to the same here. More than 600 years ago, my dear. And since then on, we never occupy 1 inch of the land out of China. Do you see? That is my country. We never launched a war out of China. Of course, we defeated American in 2 wars. First, Korea War. The Americans go there because they don't like to see the new China with the socialism. So they have the war there. We defeated them, fight them out. And then let's wear them war. Americans do some problem, we fight them out, don't worry. But we never launched any war out of China with love peace. Do we have that record? We did not. Listen, you never want love. My president. Some people say, American first. Who will be the second? My president say, let us follow the principle of planning together, contributing together, and share together. To work for what? A community of shared future for mankind. We are in one village, in one globe. We need to work for win-win cooperation. 2 more years ago, my president came here for the Joburg Summit. He launched a new era of win-win cooperation for common development. He did not come here, China first. Oh, you are second. No, we come here for win-win cooperation for common development. My dear, we never say, we build a Belt and Road. My president said, no, China, we have the capacity. We have the capacity and community to serve the whole world. How? By Belt and Road. Belt and Road, 600 years ago or longer than that, we have a lot of people out of China that sell to trade the Chinese product in the equal footing. But so that is some of, in the past, based on our culture, our record, and our current policy. You are free to think China is good or bad. You are free to think, but we try our best to be good to everyone else. So never worry about that. China, we call ourselves, will be the true friend and reliable partner of this country. Reliable partner. You go to Ethiopia, I'm proud to say, that is the good example now in the continent. Just go to Addis. Just go to Addis, spend 2 hours only. Go around to see the Addis. When His Excellency, the State Councilor, the Secretary of State, landing in Addis, the airport expansion project under the concession of China. The road he passed by at a very high speed built by China. When the stadium, the parliament building, the AU building, he addressed, built by China. That country now will not only build a railway, but also build an economic corridor. That country already, with the Chinese investment and support, that country has become the largest exporters of textile products from this continent to America. 5 years ago, they did not have. But because of China, no one else. But we did not build for China. We built one industry park, complete the industry park in 9 months. And the American businessman, he do the textile product trade in China, in Asia, but he said, no, we hope the manufacturer from India, Bangladesh, Chinese, Malaysia, to relocate the manufacturer in Addis. We built the industry park. It's American company business to mobilize those manufacturers to that park. And now we produce here and export to America. They benefit from our cooperation. I'm happy at a very cheap price and good quality. So for that is one thing I think China We have more than 50 years relation between China and this continent. We had the diplomatic relation, our relations, not only 20 years ago, my dear. We're fighting together with your people against the apartheid regime and system since 1950. Since 1950, the father of now the new foreign minister, Madame Sisulu, her father was the first team delegation to go to Beijing in 1953. He joined the gathering from this continent to Beijing and received by my president at that time called Chairman Mao. I think at that time, and since then on, we have a very good relationship to support each other. So I think now, that is something I'd like to remind you, don't worry. And for about China's rising, you worry about a conflict, the same story. Now, because you learn the textbook is too old, I'm sure. The textbook you learn is from the West. The West is very zero. The theory they adopted is zero-sum game. When you take more, I will share less. So this is they have to fight. My Chinese policy is, why? We enlarge the cake, do the cake bigger, the cake bigger, and everybody have the free to share. Their idea is outdated. The cake is here, the word is here, and everybody fight for their share. That in China we call Cold War mandated, right? Mentality. We try to ask American, now the world will go to the 21st century. My dear, the textbook in the university must be replaced by some new series. No, we cannot. For example, American, they also, of course, Americans benefit a lot from the war. But Japanese, let me say Japanese. Japanese, in 1930, they are very superior, quite developed. So they launched the war against China. They killed, of course, more than 30 million people in China. But they were killed in China also a lot. Japan did not benefit from that war. They suffered a lot. They suffered a lot. So that lesson we got from those aggressors. Don't do bad to the people, or you'll get worse. We believe when you do good to the people and the world, we'll get better. Let us work together to enlarge the cake and share each other. And that is the initiative by my president. We get the lesson. We are wise enough to get the lesson from the history. We cannot repeat the bad story. You are free to repeat, but you have to pay the price. We are not ready to pay the price. We believe, do good to the people, you will get better. That is our philosophy. So don't worry. For the new energy, the constitute, sometimes the people say Chinese, American or some people say Chinese come here to teach the language here. We have to appreciate the Confucian Institute here. Just now you have some good discussion or question to change the culture to promote our relation. It's very important, good idea, good suggestion. This institute is very important, my dear. Yesterday I talked to one promising young man. I encouraged to go to China to study in there for scholarship, but I said, my dear, you have to focus on your language study better than your knowledge. Do you understand? We pay a lot for our children to American, Australia, Canada, European Union to learn their language, their culture, their technology. We pay a lot. But now we come here to serve. You know you pay. The teacher here. To learn the language is very key. Because why? The Chinese, now they get rich, but they don't know English. It's hard for them to understand the language. If we have the time to study English, we do not have the time to earn US dollar and money. Now the rich people, they are very rich, but they don't know English. But if you know English and Chinese, Mandarin, my dear, you will be the millionaire. You get ready for the millionaire. Because why? You know how to do business with 1 of 5 population, the people in the world. You understand? Over 1.4 plus. A lot of people here that know English, Chinese. In American, they have a lot of Chinese there. Now you go to Paris, London, and New York, you now need to talk to them in English. They'll talk to you in Chinese. Because why? China, we have become the largest consumer. We go there, they will attract us. Hi, hi, ni hao. They will go, hi, hello. They will no more say, ohayo gozaimasu. They will say, ni hao, to attract you to come, right? So I think, try, my dear, for the promising young man to learn English and Mandarin. You can travel around the world. You are free to do business with so many people. That is your opportunity. I think the Institute here, you learn the American and European Union 100 years ago. We are the newcomer to this continent. For Chinese, for the Confucius Institute, we are very new. That's the recent year. Because to meet the demand of the growing demand, His Excellency, the former president of American, he's so farsighted, the President Obama. He sent million American youth to go to China to learn language. We pay by ourselves, but American, they pay by the government. Come to China to learn 1 million. So I think the language learning each other is very important. And for you just now, as some people mentioned about the culture changes, language learning changes, yes, we have about 1,000 Chinese students here in your university. We will encourage more. Because now some of them decline. Because why? Because they're concerned about security and safety. Unfortunately, some of the investors here, the good businessmen here, they earn the money here, but send their children to Australia and New Zealand. I challenge them to bring the children here. Because if they are not confident of you, they earn the money and run away. That is not in your interest. I challenge them. So the safety and security must be the top priority for your government and people. And for the new energy, yes, we invested already in your country. In the northwestern province, the largest new energy hub. About more than 600 million US dollars invested in there. This country, it seems to me, whoever want to develop the economy, you have to start it from energy. This energy now you already have, but not enough, my dear. They cut up again and again the electricity to my house, my residence. We have to ready to work for a comprehensive energy strategy. You can benefit from the coal power, coal mine, right? You have the coal mine, you export. But I don't like to export the coal mine. If I'm the South Africa, I like to attract the investor to have the coal plant, the power plant. That is a coal mine little plant, a power plant, to produce the power here and export the electricity to this region. Why export the coal? And the windy, when I went to PE, when I went to East London, when I went to Cape Town, they call the windy city. It's good for energy. And the solar here is good enough. I think the energy is there. We are ready. If you're interested, if you're open, you're ready, we have a lot. Don't worry. Now you go to China. This is, we take a lead in the world in a new energy. The third, I think, whether or not we can have, this is a country or a continent. Yes, both are right. As a continent or as a country. My dear, sometimes it's not easy. I was the Secretary General of the FOCA follow-up committee in China. In China, we have about 30 authorities to support this mechanism. Here, we have 52 countries who have the diplomatic relations with PRC. We still have 2 countries did not have. And is it possible for you to have the, of course, one Africa is good for us. One market is good for us. We love to, we support this continent to be united as one. This is our common commitment. We love to see that. A common market. But not easy, my dear. I was the Secretary General for the FOCA. Now, this time the AU say, perhaps I will on behalf of the continent to come to Beijing. I say, you are not enough. You were free to go there to share some idea. The concept, the master plan. It's okay, you're free. Industrialization, before you come, I understand. You need the industrialization. But how? The industrialization was based on country by country. Up to today, you have 2063 agenda. I'm happy to see that. But how to implement? That implementation will be based on the country by country, government by government. The AU cannot come here to implement. The AU do not have the capacity to come here to implement for you. And of course, you are also not allowed them to come here to implement, right? So now, to talk is easier. Let us unite one to go to talk. They have a different requirement. Some people need the railway. Some people need the electricity. Some people need the airport. Yes, the request is different. Based on the different situation, different culture, different levels, different people. I think it's quite different. 53, my dear, is very complicated for us to know what you need. So China now, we send 4 delegations at this moment in the continent to see your advice. Now the delegation is here. See your advice, what you need, country by country. And then we summarize 10 priority areas. But we, of course, we negotiate and discuss bilaterally. The implementation will be based on the bilateral basis. So now, if you can unite one, we are happy. It's easier for us. We only send one ambassador. We can save a lot of money. We love to see that day, but not now. It's complicated, believe me. So we are free to think, but it's not easy to practice. Can you know how to, as an AU, how to help Liberia for the national reconstruction? How to bring them from war to peace? I was the ambassador there. I was the former vice chairman of the national reconstruction. I was the former American ambassador. He was the vice chairman of the peace reconciliation, something like that. Me is for the national reconstruction. So we try our best. Different countries have the different arguments. Sometimes it's difficult for China to manage well. But principally, for industrialization and agricultural modernization, these 2 drives is good for every country. But who can benefit more or less? I tell you, the package is here. Whoever get ready, they benefit first and more. You're not ready, we respect you. So sometimes they will cry, why we did not benefit? You are not ready. You do not have the people to get ready yourself. The money will go to you directly because we come here to see the partnership instead of ownership. We cannot do any project by ourselves. When you're ready, let me know. Not only give me the concept of the project, plus feasibility study. That so ensure us the project will help you will be sustainable and profitable and beneficial to the people. Before you have the feasibility study, money will never get out of China. The commitment is huge, but the money not automatically come to your country. That will create debt. That is what we call the responsibility. So that is some of my, let's say. Just now, they have one good question, the youth. I love it. Huh? You're free. Now I'm open to the youth. We need to talk to not only the government. This is a new beginning. I promise. Because today I'm so encouraged. We are here in order, and we're free to talk, to share ideas with each other. From here, if I'm ready, I'd like to talk to each of the university, to share, open myself to the student, talk to the youth. And also, I have the idea, this year is our 20th anniversary. I'd like to mobilize, for example, 50 students or teachers from university for your summer tours to China. Why not? Yeah, whoever here, you have the chance. So, this is the year. China is not perfect. We did not follow American. They said they are perfect. They are the heaven. They are the only country, the best in the world. No, China was still on the way to improve ourselves. Don't worry. We have the long way to develop our China. But we are very confident. We can open to our brother and sister. Don't worry. So this year, I think it's a good idea. We need to open to each other. I'd like to invite. Last year, we already had the first time in our history between China and Africa. It's me. I was a teacher. Teacher is better than the official. If I invite one teacher from China come here to see who you are, what you need, he will keep talking for life in the university. If I ask pay for one official to come here, he will go quietly talk to his wife. South Africa is nice. No, my dear, last year I only sent a group, about 10. 10 the teacher from the top university in China. Because I asked all the teacher to go to know each other. And then you will share your idea with the student. It's very important. I will pay for that because that is more important than the official visit. It's very important. Our relationship, we need a very strong foundation from our people. If it does not get the support from the people, our relationship cannot stand well. It's a good idea. So I think how to apply for the scholarship to China. We have two ways. One, your daddy have the rich money. So you go there, you pay. The university is open for you all. You're free to come to the embassy or the university. But if your father like me do not have so much money, don't worry. We also offer some scholarship every year to this country. And we also some promising students, especially the students who are interested here, stay here. Mr. David, Professor, you're free to let me know. I try my best to, at least we can have to make sure, I promise, to send some students to China. Language, culture, science, technology. At least when you stay in China for 5 years, you know where's the potential for your future. For agriculture, the cooperation, I think, China is the largest agriculture country. This is when a president comes here, we understand is industrialization will sustain the economy and create jobs to the people. That is what we're fighting for. The second is agriculture modernization. Because this continent, the land are more than enough. But unfortunately, up to today, 27 countries in the continent lack of food security. About 70% of the people lack of food security. Every year, we have to donate a lot of food relief. I hate that. I challenge my government. I change FAO and welfare program. They use the international money to go to America, Australia, Canada to buy the food for you. I challenge them to give us the money, to encourage the investor to develop the land here. Food security must come from your soil instead of from coming from the sea or air. We love the food security must come from your soil. The land are more enough, the weather good enough, the water good enough. The people do not have job. We need investment. I challenge them, not by the faith for us, but introduce the financial and capital and technical input here. We are ready. So that is the two ends we are fighting together with you. For how to translate the energy, sometimes the resources in the country is more enough. Sometimes, when one day I was the ambassador to Liberia, I shared some idea with Madam President, now she retired from the government. I said, we'd love to help you to fight against poverty for common people. He said, Master, I like it, but I have no money. I said, Your Excellency, you have a lot of money. We have a lot of money in the bank, at the bank. You have the money under your ground, or controlled by the wrong people, right? Some people come here to palm the oil and run away and export the palm the crude oil and export the refined oil. And you are happy to accept them. And they say China come here to exploit the resources. We are the newcomer, my dear. Before 2000, we have no money to invest in the continent. Before 2000, for me, China is nothing. We have no money. So those people, they're lying to you. The mineral resources, natural resources, oil, energy resources in the continent dominate, controlled, monopolized by the Western company. I challenge them. I'm proud of my country. In Guinea, when I was there, I saw the dam. We just helped them to build one hydro dam. Just one very small hydro dam. The capital, together with the surrounding 11 provinces, people, with the 4.5 million people, in the history, the first time enjoying the electricity. The first in Guinea, my dear, you're so lucky you was born in South Africa. When you now in Monrovia, up to today, did not have the electricity. In Guinea, because of China, they have the electricity in the history the first time they have. So we are about to build a second one. When the second dam built, completed by September 2020, the whole country will have the regular, more than enough, and the capacity to export. In my view, we can have them to build 10. Because that country, the resources are more than a lot. It's good for the hydro resources. But they keep running for years for nothing. So the people are poor. But now we stop the water, generate electricity. Now the people in this area, in the capital area, have the TV. And now they know the world. And that is China. Those people have been there for 100 years. The iron ore controlled by land, not me. Did they build the road? Did they build the electricity? I don't know what kind. I challenge them. This is why that president opened the door for me. Talk to me 3 hours. I tell him what you have, what you need, what we can do together. He opened for me 3 hours, you understand? And I share the idea with Madam President. Now is the time for us to translate the resources you have under the ground into something to benefit the people. And that is, you need one thing, capacity building. No capacity building. Some people will come here to do and run away. You need a capacity. So whoever can help you, the capacity building in the area of infrastructure development and human resources development, they are the true friend and reliable partner. So now is the time to fight against poverty. You have no choice but to develop your economy. But economy will develop the resources first, the natural resources and the people, human resources. Now we are here. So we are ready. So this year is very important. The last question is to understand each other better. I agree, Professor. That's most important. Sometimes they're talking about our relations. That's trade and investment. That kind of relation is not comprehensive and cannot be sustained for long. Business is business, case by case. When they do good business, they are here. They are not good, they run away. We are not the relations of business. We are the comprehensive strategic partnership. And this strategic partnership based on two things. One is the peoples to peoples, mutual understanding and support. That is very important. The second is the cooperation for common prosperity. If we cannot benefit our relations, these two is very key. If just benefit one side, if only benefit, you benefit, but the investor suffer. They will never come to worry. They run away. They come here not, any investor, including from China, they come here for profit. For what profit? They call business is business. Business is profit, nothing else. You're talking about the friendship, forget about that. Business is business. Means they come here for profit. Not profit, they run away. If I'm not ready to ensure them the profit is here, run away. If they come here just to maximize the profit, to exploit the people will stand up to find them out. So this profit must be mutual beneficial. So I think to understand each other, benefit each other, our relationship will grow from strength to strength. Thank you so much.
I know all of you, our time is up, but I'd like to call Baso. We have a gift for the panel. We start with Ambassador.
Oh, my dear. Thank you so much.
Then you want for Then Then we have for you.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, lastly, I would like to thank first and foremost my co-director, once again, for the support that she gave. My entire team, you see, when the two of us as directors, we take the limelight, but the real people who work are the team that we have. And we have Professor Fu in the back, we have Michelle, we have Sunny, we have Baso right here in front, we have Charles, and we have Miss Zwane outside. These are the most hard-working people who make this possible. And please join me. Our partner, Corporate Assist, we're now thanking your organization. We work closely. We're together in the trenches, now here in this platform. So we hope to continue discussing with you for further collaboration on key issues pertaining to global peace and security. I would like to thank all of you who have come to join us and spend time. We recorded everything. It's going to be on YouTube. As all university, we're now going digital, and you'll be able to see and share with the world in terms of what we do and say.